Okay, do we have Dr. Brian C. Hales' picture in front of you?
Yes, we do.
Oh, very good. Then let us introduce and begin. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the ongoing Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. Our guest this evening, Dr. Brian C. Hales, has been with us previously and gave a very erudite representation of many of the little details that most of us had never considered. And it was the fact that I got to hear his presentation at John Whitmer in Texas that I saw that here was somebody we definitely need to get on the forum. And so he has agreed to come back and present on one of the more recent areas of research that he's been working on, and that is Joseph Smith as editor. He is a retired anesthesiologist. His presentation is not guaranteed not to put you to sleep, but probably won't. And it will provide some facts to better operate on things. So I want to thank Brian for coming to share with us again. And I want to invite you to let us pray together. Creator and editor of all that exists, we bow in supplication from our limited dimensions to your eternal vantage point with little understanding, but with humility that persists. For we see in you power to create earth, stars, galaxies, worlds beyond our ability to comprehend. And yet we stand on the threshold of eternity, merely beginning to apprehend. We see you as the author, the editor, the advocate of peace in this hour. And we recognize our need for guidance as we humans abuse our power. For our world needs editing, adjustments, perhaps a full rewrite. Our wars, our interpersonal tensions speak of the misuse of our might. So we appeal this evening on the miracle of Zoom for your blessing on Brother Hales and his audience, that we see a bit of your touch in our scriptures, a glimpse of your handprints, and that we feel the presence of your wise spirit emanating from all that exists, to be motivated to become people of peace in the arc of history that persists. We pray in the name of the Prince of Peace, Jesus. Amen. All right. Brother Hales, I'd like to give you the opportunity to decide or to indicate to us in advance whether you prefer to have people hold on to their questions and comments till after you've presented, or if you're willing to have people interrupt you with their questions and comments as you present. If you'll give us that, and then the floor will be yours.
Great. I appreciate that prayer very much, Paul. Thank you for that. And I think we're a small enough group that you can just go ahead and bring up your question as we're going along, if that's okay. Feel
That's
free
all.
to just to chime in. I I should probably let you know, and Robert, actually, we exchanged some emails today, but uh, I gave a presentation at MHA that is also an article in the latest issue of the Journal of Mormon History. And I apologize if you've already read the article because the material that we're going to go over, at least the slides that I thought I would use, is going to be pretty much the same material, not in as much depth as the article. But so if you have questions or comments, then bring it. Go ahead and bring them on. The presentation isn't that long; it won't take up the full hour, so we'll need some feedback and discussion from all of you. So, and thank you for having me. I enjoyed being with you last time. It's so fun to talk to people who know so much about the Book of Mormon as this crowd. I mean, is there any other who's studied it more? I don't know, but I felt very privileged, and again, I feel that way right now. The topic, of course, is Joseph Smith as an editor of the Book of Mormon. And I'd like to share, if it's okay, my slides with you. And let's see. Are you able to see that slide there? It's just my
Yes.
opening slide that I used here. But um, here's the article that you can see in the Journal of Mormon History if you're interested. If you have PDF and email me, I can send it to you. But one comment I made at the beginning and want to make here is that whether somebody believes that the Book of Mormon is scripture or historical fiction or something in between doesn't matter for our discussion tonight, because we're just asking the question. Joseph Smith made some changes. What were they, and what were they? And so that's kind of the question that we're going to address here. Uh, Pretty much everybody, the skeptics, and everyone agree that Joseph Smith dictated as a single word stream over about 3 months of time the entire Book of Mormon in 1829, and Oliver Cowdery was the principal scribe, but there were several others, as you know. And what is less commonly discussed is that he was the managing editor of the 1837 Kirtland edition and the 1840 Nauvoo edition. And he oversaw everything. And we have questions, big or small edits. And did he make them, or did Oliver Cowdery make some of the early ones, or did he have other people contributing? We're going to try to address some of those questions here. For the 1837 Kirtland edition, they had this in the preface, and I want to read it. It says, individuals acquainted with book printing are aware of the numerous typographical errors which always occur in manuscript editions. It is only necessary to say that the whole has been carefully re-examined and compared with the original manuscripts by Elder Joseph Smith Jr., the translator of the Book of Mormon, assisted by the present printer, Brother Oliver Cowdery, who formerly wrote the greatest portion of the same as dictated by Brother Smith. So this is very fortunate that we have this, because it tells us, at least with the 1837 edition, Joseph really was in charge. He didn't outsource that to somebody else that he was working with. He himself took it upon himself to oversee the changes and make many of them. So when we start asking the question of content editing and copy editing, and a lot of people here have written books, I know that, so you understand probably what these generally would mean, but the definitions are kind of changing. So we really want to define the difference between copy editing and content editing, as at least for our discussion tonight. And you'll understand why, I think, here in a minute. But I put together this drawing. It's very busy. I apologize for that. But if you'll look at the far left hand, there's really only 3 stages of writing. And there's pre-writing, writing the first draft, and then you rewrite the first draft. And these can be applied to the creation of the Book of Mormon as well. But once you've got that first draft, then you go into a content editing phase, and this is with your editor, and you're trying to get the content right. And then it also has other names: developmental, structural, substantive editing, or revising, redrafting. It involves moving entire chapters, sections, paragraphs. It improves overall structure, clarity, flow. It addresses subunit organization and story arcs, and just big items in the thing. You know what I'm talking about, I think most of you. And then, well, is there a question? This is a quote from Lynn Whitman Troika. She wrote the Simon & Schuster's Handbook for Writers. She said, as you revise, you're working to improve your draft at all levels: whole, essay, paragraph, sentence, and words. A revised draft usually looks quite different from its preceding draft. So you start with the first draft, and then it goes through multiple additional drafts, and you can see it there. And as you write these drafts, you'll notice in the far right hand, the refinement of the text is improving. And it keeps improving until you finally get to the copy editing phase. And what will define that as being something that works kind of on a sentence level: it corrects grammar, spelling, punctuation, improves clarity and readability, corrects typographical errors, formatting irregularities, standardizes the style according to the style guide, and it prepares the manuscript for the next step, which is typesetting. And that's, so you're getting right up to the very end. But the copy editing really are small changes to make it just more readable. So with that definition, and I don't know, I'm just going to pause. Does anybody have any questions or any comments they want to make here? If not, then with that definition, we're going to just ask the question, did Joseph do primarily content editing or copy editing? And in order to approach that, we are going to look at the people who have identified the changes. The Book of Mormon that we hold in our hands today, and I'll be honest with you, I am not as familiar. These slides are working from the perspective of the Utah Church. The good news is that we're really only going to talk about Joseph Smith's edit, so it's common to both. But the changes, the individuals who have noted the changes are all looking at the Utah Church's version that we're using today. And this was Lamoni Call, who in 1898, he sat down with a Book of Mormon, and he's from Bountiful, Utah, and he counted over 2,000 changes in the Book of Mormon. And when he counted those, for him, he thought if there were any changes, the Book of Mormon couldn't be true. He left the church, the Utah Church, over this issue. If any of you follow antagonistic literature, and that doesn't mean that it's always bad, because the Tanners, Gerald and Sandra Tanner, have actually produced some very useful things over the years. But Gerald sat down with a 1948 copy of the Book of Mormon, and he did this in 1963 or something. But he just hand counted everything, and here's a picture of a couple of his pages of how he marked it up, and he came up with 3,913 changes. And am I still sharing the screen? Something changed here, Paul. Can you still see it?
Somehow your screen share has dropped out, so please go back and share again.
Yeah. All right. Let's see how I do that.
It happened about the time that Rick Bennett jumped in, so we'll hold
I
him.
probably knocked you off, Brian, just because I like to do that.
Well, no, it saw you and it saw me. It preferred you, I think, is what it was. So,
oh, we've had him
all
on
right.
in. Really, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you see it now? To get it back up? Or
It says you're sharing there. It's
Yeah.
in small size. Can you make it
okay,
big?
let me try that
Oops.
again. Yeah. What's that? Better?
Right
Not
now,
yet.
we just got a black screen that says you're sharing.
Oh my goodness.
There it
Oh.
is. There we go.
It's probably
You're
my
back.
hotspot. Sorry about that. And that may have been the problem. Maybe if I put my phone over by the window, it'll be better. But anyway, getting back to where we were, Gerald Tanner sat down with the current Book of Mormon used by the Utah Church, and then he marked the changes versus the 1830 published edition that Joseph did. And you can see he had 4 tags: words added, words deleted, textual change, and spelling change. And it's just very manual work, and it would be tedious. But the reason I can say that is that I recounted his, and I came up with 3,898. Now, I'm not accusing him of I don't know, playing with the numbers, because if you include the preface material and the testimonies at the end, it's actually over 4,000. So his 3,913 is probably what he came up with. And but then I also wanted to try it. So in 2022, I got Word, and if any of you have used the compare feature in Word, Microsoft Word, you can put 2 manuscripts in, and it'll compare the 2 and highlight all the changes, and which is what I did. And then I went through and color coded them according to the tags that I wanted to use. I came up with 4,066. And then I did it again last year and came up with 4,160, but I was using the latest edition, the 2013. There were a few changes between 81 and 13 for the Utah Church. But the good news is we don't have to use this amateur kind of data, because Royal Skousen, a BYU professor, but he's a linguist and highly respected, with the help of Stan Carmack, he came out with a book in 2024, and the entire volume was just on the changes between the 1830 and the 1840. So he's counting all of the changes that Joseph was overseeing. And it was so fortunate when I found this book and I was working on this
Audio.
chapter. Comment?
I'm sorry, Brian, but I missed your last statement. Your audio got garbled.
Oh my goodness. I hope the hotspot's not going to
Start,
cause me
start with Royal
problems.
Thousand again.
Okay.
I think that was Paul's internet. I heard everything okay, so it may be just internet slowage.
That's possible.
Well, and I'm happy to repeat you for you, Paul. That's fine too. And I just hope we have a problem with the hotspot. But Royal is a linguist and well respected, and he knows more about the primary manuscripts of the Book of Mormon, I think, than about anybody. And he happened to come out with a book that covers the exact material that this presentation, and this is actually a chapter in a book I have coming out within within the next year. We're just going through the final edits now. But anyway, what Royal did is he was able to identify who was making the changes. So you'll see in the upper frame there, these are changes that are made to the manuscript by Joseph Smith, and you can see that there's an interlineal addition up in here, and you'll see there's a cross out over here. Notice how it's cross-hatched instead of just putting a line through it. As I've done in the typescript below. And I think that's the way they do legal documents. I don't know if we have any legal people here, but Joseph was editing I guess as an attorney might edit a document in the legal profession. But this is just an example. And then, yeah, you can see here the two examples. But what Royal said was that for the 1837 Kirtland edition, he said, out of the total of 3,168 changes, Joseph Smith marked the printer's manuscript 2,183 times. And so there's over 4,000 changes, but we can say Joseph was responsible for over half of these, and we're going to get more specific here in a minute. Brent Gardner, he made this comment. He said, it's clear that Joseph did not believe that the words of either the Book of Mormon or his own revelations were unchangeable. He required that changes were made according to proper authority, but a change could be made and changes were made. Both Joseph and others he worked with were allowed to improve the text after it was revealed. So the next question that comes up is we've kind of got numbers of how many changes there were, and you'll see that there were 3,100 and something for the 1830, and then you'll see another 300 or so were made between 1837 and 1840. And that's where we get the bottom number there, 3,407. But the question is, were these long or short? Well, most of them were 1 to 3 words. There were only a few dozen in the 4 to 13 word category, and then none of them were over 13 words. And that to me is really maybe the most significant thing about the whole study is none of the changes were over 13 words in length. What were some of the common changes? Well, which to who, saith to said, hath to has, they was to they were, deleted words of that and they and them to those. So just an attempt to get rid of some of the old English and the non-standard English and make it more readable. We're all familiar with the double negatives. I think you've noticed those. There are 16, and I think he got all 16 of them in his edits. And I'll just leave that slide up for a second. You can just kind of see how he approached some of the double negatives. There isn't a single pattern to correct them. He's working on each one individually. And he got all of those. Also, the a prefixing, another element that we think probably came from upstate New York vernacular, but I can't prove that. But he was a going, a beginning, a pointing, a journeying, a marching, a coming. Joseph eliminated the a prefixing in all 16 of the cases that were in the original Book of Mormon. To summarize, of the 3,407 changes made during Joseph Smith's lifetime, 3,334 involved 1 to 3 words, and then the remaining 73 were 4 to 13 words. So we're left with 73. We want to look at these 73, but 47 of them are just strikeouts of it came to pass. And we still have over 1,200 it came to passes. And like 3% of the total number of words of the Book of Mormon still are it came to pass or some variation of that. There's still a lot more in the Bible, as you know. But what about these others? Besides the 47, there still leaves us 24 and or 26 rather. We have an artifact that kind of pops up because the 1837 Kirtland edition eliminated 8 phrases that were later restored. And so they'll kind of show up in some of the numbers and not show up in other numbers, depending upon which editions are being compared. But these have all been corrected again in the later editions. And then we have, these are the most important changes Joseph made in my estimation, because these are the longer ones, 4 to 13 words. And if you look down, you can see it. It's a busy slide. It's actually right out of the article. I used the one that they had because it seemed a little easier to read. But just to highlight a few of the things, or to just summarize them, and then we'll look a little closer. But 9 of them are to remove a redundancy. 2 of them restore text from the original manuscript. 2 improve grammar. 1 is a rephrasing. 1 of them is a non-word deletion, the word numerority. And you're probably familiar with this already, but what a funny word, numerority. You can kind of figure out what it meant, but why would a non-word have made it into the dictation? We can only speculate. But then there are 3 that are additions. And these are the only expansions Joseph Smith did in the Book of Mormon. And you know that Joseph would expand some of his earlier revelations before he would print them in 1835 or in later editions. He didn't do that with the Book of Mormon. These are very small, and partake of the fruit out of the waters of baptism, and shalt not remember the reproach of thy youth. And you could argue that none of these are significant. You could leave them out and it wouldn't change a thing in the Book of Mormon. So there are, however, let me pause. Are there any questions about this, anything that we've covered so far? Nobody's asleep. I actually wouldn't be offended if you did fall asleep, but I usually tell people I might send you a bill or something. That's my own joke, because I was an anesthesiologist. But anyway, the changes with a possible doctrinal impact, there's 4. And if you look at what the critics are saying about the Book of Mormon, sometimes they'll say, yeah, there were doctrinal changes. Well, maybe there were. Let's look at what the candidates are, and then you can decide for yourself. But Joseph, as you know, added the phrase "the son of" in 4 places in the 1837 printing, apparently to clarify that Christ, although God, is also the Son of God. But there are several other places where he didn't make the change. So the ambiguity persists throughout the Book of Mormon. The word "of" is exchanged for a comma on 2 pages, and it's to clarify that Christ was not the grandson of God. If you read the 1830 version, you would actually envision Christ as the grandson of God, and this is to clarify that. A white and delightsome people is changed to a pure and delightsome people. Again, I'm sure you're aware of all of these. We don't know why he made the change, because again, there's several other places where if white is just a metaphor or symbolic of being pure, there were other places that could have been changed and weren't. And then lastly, Joseph changed Jesus Christ in the 1830 Book of Mormon to the Messiah in the 1830 print. This is in 1 Nephi 12:18 in the Utah Book of Mormon. So I don't know why he would have made that change either. Probably the most famous of all the changes in the Book of Mormon is switching the name of Benjamin to Mosiah on page 200, and then Orson Pratt for the Utah edition. I don't know how the RLDS Community of Christ if they changed the second one or not. Does anybody know, Paul? Do you know about it'd be Ether 4:1 in the Utah Book of Mormon, where Orson Pratt had also changed it.
Let me look.
Yeah, great. These edits were apparently to correct the belief that the plates mentioned were the 24 plates of ether, which Mosiah, not King Benjamin, translated. However, Royal Skousen said the problem has to do with the chronology, and he thinks the 2 original readings with Benjamin are very likely correct. So we find these two changes, probably the most famous ones that he says maybe wouldn't have been needed. Anyway, when you get that, Paul, just jump right in. So Royal Skousen said this: none of the changes to the 1837 Book of Mormon involve any significant change in meaning. The Tanners, Gerald and Sandra, seem to agree with this. They said most of the 3,913 changes which we found were related to the correction of grammatical and spelling errors and do not really change the basic meaning. So if we want to just summarize Joseph's managing editor style, this is just a single slide, but believe me, there's so much work that went into to coming up with this thing. So we're just going to review them, but he personally crafted all the changes that might impact doctrine. Nobody else did any that you would interpret that way, probably. He produced all of the longer changes. Every one of the 4 to 13 word changes he was responsible for. None of the Book of Mormon changes exceeded 13 words. None of his changes significantly altered the original meaning. His edits consistently improved readability for a modern audience. He applied his edits sporadically and unevenly. He reported no new inspiration or revelation as guiding his edits. He did not hold the original language inviolable. He did not significantly expand or enhance the earliest text, and he did not alter or move an entire sentence, paragraph, or section.
Wow,
So,
that last point's a big one.
yeah, the fact that he didn't move any involve a full sentence edit is anyway, any luck on finding that?
Now, give me again the context, because I'm not dealing with the same edition, so therefore, what is the context for that?
Ether 4 and 2. The
4.
I can help a little, Paul.
We don't have any. There's no Benjamin in Ether, according to my my.
Isn't it Mosiah 21:28?
well, that's one of them. No, I'm going to have to go back. I'm confused about this. Maybe it was from the earlier version of the. Let me get back with you on that, because I just pulled up Ether 4 and 1.
I'm not following the. I mean, but I do remember the discussion of this, but it's not something I've ever dug into specifically to check as you have requested. So I'm going to have to defer on the matter.
Well, and I think what happened was is I'm using the edition that Orson Pratt changed rather than our modern one, and that's one I'm going to have to correct. So
Yeah. Okay.
So, but with this list of Joseph Smith's managing editing style, we can now go back to the original questions of, was it content editing or copy editing? And if we look at it, just the general, I'm not going to read this, but this is just kind of a summary of the editing that he did. It's really not content editing. It's more of copy editing. And that's my conclusion. If somebody has some thoughts or insights, and maybe to the contrary, please chime in. But they're just small changes. They don't change meaning, and these things would put them under the copy editing heading. But then it brings up this fun question: does the Book of Mormon need content editing? The answers are going to be subjective, and yet what I have concluded is that if we look at the goals of the content editing, which involve moving big parts of the text, I believe that the first edition, as it left Joseph's mouth, basically fulfills most of the goals of content editing. And again, this is a subjective assessment by me, but just a few examples, and you'll recognize these slides from my previous presentation, but there are 77 storylines that to me seem to flow coherently. You've got 207 named characters that are mentioned 3,780 times with possibly 2 mistakes. Again, this is the Benjamin and Mosiah change. There are 44 social geographic groups mentioned 1,674 times with no mistakes. There's 147 geographical locations by my count, and different people give different numbers here, but that's why I provided the names here. But they're mentioned 670 times with 2 mistakes. There are over 200 references to 3 chronological systems that seem to flow very well. The chronology in the Book of Mormon can become very complex, and Elizabeth Fenton, who's a esteemed scholar, non-Latter-day Saint, non-Community of Christ, but she just, as a scholar, wrote, the Book of Mormon consistently depicts time as multi-layered, multi-directional, and running out of sequence. The Book of Mormon presents time as a set of planes tethered to each other, yet running independently. There are complex genealogies that unfold without any flaws. Then the flashbacks, you remember the first time you read the Book of Mormon, or the second, you had to sit down and plot it, at least I did, to try to keep everybody straight with Zeniff and Noah and Alma leaving, and yet they unfold without any errors. And then there are a lot of internal sources, again, that just increase the complexity of the book. On the religious side, there are, according to James T. Duke, 68 sermons or religious discourses, and they vary from like 80 words up to 10,000 words, but they deal with over 80 different Christian religious topics. And there's 100 name titles for God, some of which are only used by certain authors. To remember to do that in the dictation would again make things complicated. The Book of Mormon has received some positive reviews. I remember Dan Vogel in one of his podcasts, and Dan's a friend of mine, but Dan was very critical. So, and of course there is clunky vernacular and things, but as literature, there's some pretty high-powered people who are not members of either church or of the tradition, Restoration tradition, any, who have looked at the Book of Mormon in context and said that it should rank among the great achievements in American literature. Gordon S. Wood, the Book of Mormon is one of the greatest documents in American cultural history. So as we look at that, my conclusion is that the Book of Mormon came from Joseph really ready for copy editing. And if this is accurate, and if somebody agrees with me on that, it's kind of surprising because, and you authors out there know what I'm talking about, but an aspiring author, a beginner, might think that you work so hard to get the inspiration and then you struggle with that first draft and then you just do a little editing and then publish it. But you and I know that that's not how it works at all. That the inspiration, you write the first draft, but then the work really begins as you have this dance with your editor that can turn into a wrestling match back and forth and until you finally wish you hadn't even started is kind of the you probably don't feel that bad, but that's the illustration here. The next question, though, that's kind of fun to think about, does the Book of Mormon need further copy editing? And we talked about what the goals of copy editing were. Grant Hardy, who wrote Understanding the Book of Mormon, said there are still sentence fragments, misplaced prepositional phrases, pronouns, unclear antecedents, and verses in which the subject changes mid-sentence. So he's pointing out a lot of issues in the current version of the Book of Mormon. And let's just look at a couple of examples. Ether 9:8 says, and now the brother of him that suffered death, and his name was Nimrod, was angry with his father. And then 3 Nephi 3:11, and we cast lots who of us should go into the house of Laban. Well, if you look at that, the first 4 words are a full sentence, but everything after the dash is not a full sentence. And the original typesetter, Gilbert, John L. Gilbert, added about 200 dashes. And that number in the Utah Book of Mormon has doubled almost. There's almost 400 dashes. That's how the editors are dealing with these sentence fragments. And they usually your editors won't let you do that. They say, rewrite this sentence, or they just rewrite it for you. But of course, that's not a step that any of the editors have been willing to do. And so if we want to think that Joseph Smith was able to do the content editing in his head before he dictated it, this would be for the naturalist explanation, those who embrace that. There is some statements. This is one from Ross Winterrout. He wrote Rhetoric, a Synthesis. He said, the fact that fluent writers can revise as they go demonstrates both the versatility of the attention and the very small psychic investment that they find necessary for editing. Of course, Joseph wasn't known to really have written anything except maybe a couple of letters before he dictated the Book of Mormon. But there are people that apparently can do a lot of editing in real time. So the conclusion, again, I come up with is that the Book of Mormon needs more copy editing. I know the Utah church leaders are probably not going to worry about it. They, at least the trend has been to make little ticky-tack changes, but nothing that would be significant copy editing. And the other good news, I'm just doing a little advertising here, but my book called Authoring the Book of Mormon, Investigating Joseph Smith's 1829 Literary Skills, we're going through some of the final edits. We don't have a date or anything, but within the next year it should be out, and it's quite lengthy, and it'll just help investigate what we can know about what Joseph Smith's communication and literary skills were in 1829. Because right now the most common explanation for how Joseph created the Book of Mormon is that he was just smart enough. If you go into academic centers, they'll say, oh yeah, he could do it. And yet those opinions, I would argue, and the book I think makes it pretty clear, is that the Joseph Smith in 1829, 23-year-old farmer with, a couple of years of one-room schoolhouse education, no one who knew him believed that he had the intellectual ability to create the Book of Mormon. Everyone who described his intellect and education and oratory ability described him as having maybe beginner level, maybe competent when he got later into Nauvoo, but he didn't have the skills, and yet we will show that in the book when it comes out. So anyway, Paul, that's pretty much everything I had presented and had prepared. I hope that I guess I'm done a little bit early. I apologize for that.
That's fine. Thank you. I have questions. I'm confident others will too.
Great.
And I noticed with your is head in the hat for the translation process, and that's something we've had addressed by Jonathan Neville. Other people have addressed that matter on the program, and the hat is not generally favored by the people that are presented as a viable explanation.
Yeah, I'm aware of their books. I've read them, and I had a full appendix in my book, 10,000 words addressing the issue, and I just don't agree with the methodology that is being used to draw that conclusion. And just one caveat is that if Joseph Smith were pulling out 50 pounds of gold almost every day for 3 months and plopping it down on a table hidden by a curtain. Remember, he was chased out of Manchester because they wanted the treasure and they believed he had it. He hid it in the barrel of beans. And if he were hauling that out in Harmony, again, it's 130 miles away, but the issue of somebody trying to just walk in and steal the plates, there's an issue of security that I think those who advance the theory that he's using the plates every day to translate, I don't think they fully address the problems it would have caused, because you could shield the view of the plates, but you couldn't shield the fact that these were metal, they would rattle. There were non-members or non-believers who were scribes for some of the time. Reuben Hales, Emma's brother, and others who did not believe in Joseph as a prophet, they were involved with some of it. Others walked in on it, according to their accounts. They would have been able to detect that there was a big weighty object made of metal on the other side of this curtain. And he's telling people he had plates of gold. So there's a whole security issue that I don't think the books that have been written, and I've gone through both of them by Jonathan, and I can't remember who was his co-author who was on this program, who was very cordial to me last time. And then there's another set that are people that are advancing that on the Joseph Smith Foundation website. But I just don't see it that way. And then if you go to the actual accounts from Emma and David Whitmer, I mean, they're describing a very similar process. Elizabeth Whitmer, Cowdery. There's quite a few of eyewitnesses that say he's using a stone and a hat. So I don't know. I don't want to cause an argument here, but I'm happy to respond to question.
It's Jim Lucas is a co-author.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've met him. Nice guy. He and I just don't see eye to eye on that, I think.
Paul, you muted yourself.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, if I could get unmuted there, I'd like to go back to your earlier comments about the there were very few editorial adjustments to the 1840 edition. The 1840 edition is the one I got to dig up in Nauvoo, and so I'm particularly interested in that one. And yet, well, and for Ebenezer Robinson to take the hand edited copy in his pocket to Cincinnati and get those adjustments made. I mean, to me, that's a very close to home story because I got to dig up those tiny. They're so tiny. To publish a book that was the Book of Mormon small enough so you could carry it in a pocket meant that the print was 3 point and almost have to have a magnifying glass to read it.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
And you said what was it, 30 or 300 correct he made on that one?
Well, if you just take the numbers that Royal Scalzo gives in his book, it's around 300. Yeah, so there were 3,100 plus between 30 and 37, and then just another 300.
Yeah, 300 editions for that for that edition, and uh, that's sort of minimal. Yeah, it seems like, well, he may have been busy, I guess, in that time.
He didn't have the printer's manuscript. Oliver Cowdery had taken that with him, and I think he was using that a lot to make the edits. So maybe that complicated the process some.
Okay, well, I'll yield to Terry and other people who have questions and comments. Let's give them that chance.
Okay, Terry, go ahead, please.
Okay, I have two questions. First is a personal one. Brian, do you have grandparents or other Hales relatives that served in a mission in 1968 in Nauvoo?
You know, I don't. And yet most of us go back to a monogamous couple that came out of Nauvoo and they had 4 sons. And most of the Hales across the Wasatch Front trace back to that couple, but not all of them. So I'm probably related.
Okay, thank you. The main question is, it's a cultural question. A week or 3 ago, we had a presentation on Moroni's or Mormons editing. Is there any way to deal with Mormons editing versus Joseph Smith's editing versus people in the 21st century editing? Those are all cultural things. Has that ever been addressed?
It's a great question. Who was a presenter on Mormon's editing? I think I saw an article on that, but I hadn't read it, so I probably can't respond to it. But it'd be a great study to try to do, to compare the different types of editing.
Basically, the answer is we don't know then, right?
Well, I mean, you'd have to be speculating on anything that we attribute to Mormon. And then there's that question did somebody who knew English and Reformed Egyptian create an interim version of the Book of Mormon that was then fed to Joseph Smith through the seer stone? Again, it goes back to this loose or tight control thing, which I don't get into. But somebody in the system had to, maybe it was God or somebody working for God. It's all speculative. And I don't like to get into that stuff because you can't test the answer, right? You can't test your theory.
That's right. Well, I'm just curious. Thanks.
It's a fun thing to think about. Royal Scalzo once complained because in one of his articles he had he had suggested maybe there was a committee on the other side of the veil and they had done the translation and fed it mostly to Joseph. And I guess he got a lot of negative feedback on that. And he didn't like that because he kind of complained about what had happened a time or two. I heard him speak about how he didn't like being criticized for that. So.
I'm done.
Jane, go ahead.
Oh, oh, hi Brian.
Hi, Shane.
It's good to see you. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
good to see you.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I was wondering if you've ever looked at the latest 2023 edition of the Restored Covenant edition published by the Book of Mormon Foundation out of Independence, and I was wondering if so, how accurate you thought that one was.
Um, I am not familiar with that. And there's actually been some annotated are you talking about the Firm Foundation?
No.
This is a different one, right? Yeah, they came out with their own annotated version of the Book of Mormon, and that's been probably 5 years ago. To be honest with you, I've kind of had my hands full with just the research I've been doing on the original. So, oh, I see it. There it is. Thank Rick. And I can't comment. I apologize.
I'll just piggyback on that. So this is it's a independent fundamentalist group right up your alley, Brian, that has produced this this is brand new. I just got it within the last couple of months, and they've tried to go through and add in a bunch of stuff that Joseph Smith said. And anyway, so it's interesting.
It's not Denver Snuffers, right? His came
No,
out quite a few
no,
years
these
ago.
are unaffiliated. Or if you're familiar with that polygamous temple in Missouri, um, it's it's that non-group group. So yeah.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
In 1966, the RLDS Church published an edition that removed many of the duplicative phrases. It happens that my grandmother, Audrey Stubbert, was primary actor in that, along with Chris Hartshorn, and that volume received glowing reviews from a few of us, and promptly was disposed of by the majority. Interesting how when editors do try to make things more readable and simplified, we have an awful lot of tendency, I think, to want to retain the traditions of verbiage, cadence, um, duplicative words, and so forth that we're familiar with in Scripture. And so my grandmother was, I think, well ahead of her years in terms of doing some of that copy editing and trying to. Well, they didn't move or the Book of Ether to the front where it belonged, but they at least gave consideration to that. Putting the chronology back together, so it made more sense, I thought would have been a good idea. But again, there's room, I think, for a great deal of variance, and we still have the other editions, and so I see no good reason why people shouldn't try to help get the message out. There's so much dispute over it, and that is to say, for people. Well, here we are planning the Book of Mormon bicentennial at Lamoni in 2030, and to recognize that there are so many different viewpoints about the book. I see no problem with allowing people to continue to edit as long as the fundamental messages are brought forward to help people understand that we are called upon to become people of peace, and that we're all invited to the promised land. There are these fundamental messages that if you follow the teachings of Christ, you have a much better chance of living in peace and prosperity than if you don't follow those teachings. And so, for us to be able to pursue, well, here you pursue the editor of our lives, to allow him to continue to nudge us where we ought to go, to me makes sense. I mean, we get to live, if we get to live long enough, we get to live as long as Blair Bryant. You get quite a lot of editing in life. I haven't gotten that. I'm 20 years behind him or so, but to be able to go through the editing that we get in life is really an important and charming thing to do. And so I would like to urge that we allow ourselves to be more completely edited. And the book as well. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put an end to the discussion on that comment. Yeah, if we recognize that God is our editor and He is our author, then for us to be able to work out the vocabulary that we ought to be using in representing Him, representing the divine, um, yeah, there's some challenge to that. And so I find with everything I scribble that I've got to rewrite, and the idea of being able to get a first draft to work as well as the Book of Mormon has is just awesome. All right, there's Rick.
Go
All
ahead,
right, I
Rick.
gotta unmute too. So Brian, what do you think? I've heard that Joseph Smith attended a Methodist seminary or something like that in the mid 1820s. I know a lot of people like to tout his lack of formal education, but I've heard that that was kind of like a junior college education, and that would have been around the time of translation of the Book of Mormon. Do you have a reaction to that?
Boy, yeah. I wonder if two things are being kind of combined here, Rick, but there is a guy named Orsimus Turner, maybe you remember him, but he commented on Joseph Smith being a passable Methodist exhorter. And in his book, Visions in a Seer Stone, William Davis inflates that to Joseph receiving training and all. And there's nothing to support that. In fact, he was only involved for about 6 months as an exhorter. But also, Orsimus Turner, in that same chapter in his book, mentions that Joseph was involved with the Juvenile Debate Club. And in his PhD dissertation, William Davis mentions debate almost 100 times and inflates these two very brief references. And the saddest thing about, and he's not the only one, but he's the easiest one to identify because he's written a book and he's done this in this book, Visions in a Seer Stone. You remember, I think you interviewed him, didn't you? And
Yeah.
I like William because he's actually getting into the meat of how did Joseph do it, and he's coming up with theories. I think the theories are problematic, but at least he's going there when no other uh, skeptic has been willing to date. But in the same chapter where Orsimus Turner says Joseph was a passable Methodist exhorter and he was involved with the Juvenile Debate Club, he also said Joseph had less than ordinary intellect. It's one package. Okay, whatever Joseph's doing in his exhorting or in his debating, he's doing it with less than ordinary intellect, according to the only person to remember it. Nobody else remembers him being involved with the Methodists as an exhorter except for Orsimus Turner. One single reference. Same with the debate. And so I don't know where these things that he see. You're repeating some of the inflation, I think. Now, there's also a second part of this that might be conflated in whoever was talking to you, because when Hiram Smith when Joseph was recovering from his knee operation, Hiram Smith was attending Moore's Charity School on the Dartmouth campus. Now, the charity school and the Dartmouth were separate things, but there's a theory that Hiram Smith received all this training from Dartmouth religious professors and then came home. He's only 13 years old and Joseph was 7, but that he taught Joseph all this stuff. And that's where Joseph got the ideas for the Book of Mormon. So that's another pathway from academia to Joseph Smith. or if somebody wants to assume that Joseph was involved with the Methodists, there's no historical evidence to support that. So, at least that I found. Does that address what you're thinking?
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you say there's no evidence that he actually attended and I don't know if seminary is the right word, but a school or what of some sort. So there's not enough evidence of that.
There's none. I mean, whatever your quote, I mean, maybe
I
I
mean,
missed
I'm
it,
just
but
going off my William Davis interview. I just remember him saying that.
right. Well, and in his book, he mentions the Methodist training 22 times. I hand counted them when I wrote the review of his book. And yet it all stems from that single reference by Orsimus Turner to him being a passable exhorter. And from that, William Davis just goes off, and he would have had training, and he might have done this, and he'd done that. And he never tells his audience that Orsimus Turner thought Joseph had less than ordinary intellect. It's kind of a proof text thing, because you imagine Joseph doing things that would require at least an ordinary intellect, but that little detail isn't included. So no, there is nothing. And in my book, when it comes out, there's an appendix with over 250 references, every one I could find over the last 10 years, to Joseph's intellect, his education, or his oratory ability. And so I've looked in every detail for anything I could find. I think I would have found it. I've had some help from Don Bradley too. But the point is that if people are giving this story about him getting this education, I need to see the primary documentation. I don't think it exists, but I'm open. I want it all to be out there, but I'm confident that this is just somebody adding to what we do know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good question. Really important.
Okay, Blair, go ahead, please.
I've got rid of all my books, but I was talking with Richard Howard, who was our historian until about 95 or so, 1995. And he has written a book he was just finishing up at that time when I was talking with him. And I got a copy of his book later on, and I read it with great interest. He made a point about printing. I'm interested in the printing field because my father was in the printing field. I served as a printing press assistant when I was, between high school and college, really. For a couple of summers. So my dad was a lithographer, printer, an artist, and he described the situation of the first printing of the Book of Mormon, something like this. As Oliver Cowdery was sitting there observing as Grandin was publishing, he would be looking at individual pages, and they would find a place where some type was working up and needed to be rehammered into position. And sometimes they found an error, and right there and then they stopped printing, or they were working on 3,000 copies. They stopped printing. Grandin took the print, he put the errors or the new type in the position, or made a change that they had been missed in the original viewing of the putting the type together. And according to Howard, as I understand and remembered it, they made those changes on the fly at any particular moment that they found the problem. They would fix it. They did not go back and reprint any of those pages. They just continued. So the errors that were in the first maybe 1,000 pages, got left there. And he concluded that there were hardly any two of those Book of Mormons that were exactly alike in the 1830. He said there was, because when they put them together, they took them in the sequence that they had, and almost every run they had stopped somewhere and changed things as they found a problem. This counting for those very tiny details, if you're using only one of those Book of Mormons, you're going to have problems of a few letters, few words, and so on. And there are no two of those Book of Mormons, he said. Well, he didn't say there were no two alike, but he said it would be very difficult to find that two were identical. That means to me that we're making molehills out of mountains, or mountains out of molehills. And I'm not so sure that we have really solved anything. We have just uncovered man's mistakes because man makes mistakes. I won't criticize what you're doing because I think the Book of Mormon can stand on its own with its errors. I think its errors were in the title page. If there are mistakes, they are the mistakes of men, not of God. And if we take that approach, I think we're on a better footing than if we try and nitpick what is obviously going to have errors in it. I'm sorry. I like your work. I appreciate the effort that you put into it. But to me, it is wandering in the wilderness with no place to go because you're going to find them, the errors. But thanks for your presentation.
Brian's muted, I think.
Oh, I don't know what to say. I appreciate that. And I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want to shine a light on a process nobody has looked into in any detail. So, no, I appreciate those words.
I think that what you said, these little errors are in there, and they're changed. Somebody goes in and changes, but based on which one of the changes is a question mark. And there have been so many changes that you just got changes because people make mistakes.
Thanks, Blair. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Blair, for that comment. That the idea that 1830 edition would not have two copies that were identical strikes me as being readily explained by what you've done there. And yeah, those people who study these things with such detail are, I think, finding that. But that's a fascinating explanation. I would like to ask Brian about the Jonathan Edwards quotes. Is to say, Jonathan Neville and James Lucas have counted, I think it's something over 300 quotes in the Book of Mormon that appear to come directly from Jonathan Edwards' writing. And that would appear then that Joseph had read and, and internalized a good deal of that. And so we have these multiplicity of quotes there that are statistically significant. Your comment?
Yeah, and it's a great question because in researching the Book of Mormon, I have discovered quite a number of some very fine scholars who have been willing to say Joseph Smith was looking at this book or at that book, and their only evidence that they can present is what they see as parallels in the verbiage or in the content or perhaps both. And Jonathan Edwards with Jonathan Neville's book on that is a good example of that. And the interesting thing is, and I'm trying to bring it up here, but my computer's just stalling out here. But there are so many people who say that he borrowed from the Apocrypha. He borrowed from Adam Clark's commentary. He borrowed from Jonathan Edwards. He borrowed from Marco Polo. He borrowed from, there's a whole list of these things. And if I could get my computer to work, I could read you some of these. This is from my book. But it's called parallelomania, and that's not my word. That's a word that the Christian scholars have used when people are trying to draw parallels between the book of or the Bible and other sources. And they call it parallelomania, which is drawing conclusions from parallel content and the only parallel content without showing that Joseph ever read Jonathan Edwards. And there's no evidence that he did. There's no evidence he read Adam Clark or Marco Polo. He would have been exposed to the Apocrypha because that was in the Bible that he used. But let me see if I can find that here. Yeah. Listen to these parallels and you'll understand what I mean here. Adam Colby Townsend, he's a fine scholar, good guy, but he says Smith likely used Adam Clark's commentary on the Bible as he dictated lengthy chapters of Isaiah into the narrative framing the book. And he goes on and tries to support that. And then we have Jonathan Neville says, second only to the King James Bible, Jonathan Edwards appears to have been the biggest influence on Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Mormon. And then we have William Davis, who says this. He said, John Bunyan's works, he wrote The Pilgrim's Progress back in the 1600s, I think it was. John Bunyan's works deeply influenced the young Joseph Smith, indeed, as deeply as Scripture itself. It may well be no exaggeration to claim that without Bunyan's ubiquitous influence on Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon might never have come into existence. Harold Bloom, who is a nationally recognized Christian scholar, said, researchers have not yet established to my satisfaction precisely how much the prophet Joseph knew about Jewish esoteric tradition or Kabbalah, or about the Christian Gnostic heresies. And then he theorizes that Joseph must have been reading it. Grant Palmer, in his book, An Insider's View, there are similar motifs, descriptions, and occasionally the same terminology in both the Book of Mormon and the Golden Pot by E.A. Hoffman. And then we have John Durham Peters saying, that Joseph borrowed from Thaddeus of Warsaw. He said, I do not claim the Book of Mormon slavishly steals matter unaltered from Thaddeus of Warsaw, but traces appear to be creative refashionings. And then Gerald and Sandra Tanner said, our research led us to believe that Joseph Smith borrowed material from the Apocrypha in creating the Book of Mormon. R. John Williams said, for Mormon studies, in particular, one key point of continuity between the metaphysical tradition in the Book of Mormon has been the legend of Enoch. And then Meredith Ray Sheets says Joseph Smith wanted the Book of Mormon to sound like the Bible and plagiarized the travels of Marco Polo. And then lastly, Lars Nielsen says that might Joseph Smith have had a selection of Athanasius Kircher's works on his desk when he claimed to translate this work. So anyway, those are just the I could have expanded this, and I'm sorry about the long answer, but it's a great question. That when we start drawing parallels without showing a connection, there's no evidence Joseph saw any of these books. Everybody's drawing their conclusions, and you saw some of the verbiage they're using is we know that he saw or read the Pilgrim's Progress or Marco Polo or Age of Reason. I left that one out, but Grant Adamson says that he's sure Joseph was responding to Thomas Paine's Age of Reason. And so it's using parallels, I think, to an extreme. And I don't think Joseph Smith did see it. There's no evidence that he did, and his level of exploration of Christian themes is certainly undocumented if he did it at all.
Mm. Okay, that's a very interesting answer, and I appreciate it. As I recall, Neville and Lucas indicated that in the time that he spent with his uncle in Salem, that he would have had exposure at that point. But you're right. I don't know there's any documented evidence that he actually was reading Jonathan Edwards. However, Jonathan Edwards clearly was one of the more prolific writers and one of the more published people of the time. Let me go to another question, if I may, please, then, because I think your answer there is quite clear. Joseph Smith editing until 1840 left the rather clear attitude toward polygamy as an abomination. My understanding is that you're one of those people who advocates that he was involved in polygamy and teaching it. And if he was editing the Book of Mormon up until 1840 and teaching the opposition of what he was saying in the Book of Mormon, that contradiction bothers me. Perhaps you can clarify.
That's a great question, Paul, and you're not alone in people who wonder about this. My response is not earth-shattering. It's the one that you probably heard before. But if you read Jacob chapter 2, verse 30, there's a verse there that says that God, if I will raise up seed unto me, I will command my people, which can be read. And I've had linguists tell me that it may not mean what everybody's saying, but it seems to say if God wanted to expand his people, he would command them to go ahead and introduce polygamy. It could be read that way. So even in 1829, some of us are reading the Book of Mormon as saying, okay, unauthorized polygamy is bad always. And Joseph always taught that. Even in Nauvoo, when I believe he was introducing it secretly, there was Hiram Brown who was practicing polygamy without Joseph's authority. At least that's the way it was presented. And he was excommunicated. So unauthorized polygamy has always been condemned. It's condemned in the Book of Mormon. It was condemned in Joseph Smith's day and would be today in all of the traditions, I think. So at least the prominent traditions. But I don't think Joseph saw any need to change the Book of Mormon, even though in 1840 he I don't believe he was practicing polygamy at that time, but we believe that in the Utah church that an angel had appeared at least twice to him by that time, telling him to introduce it, and that did not contradict anything in the Book of Mormon, because there is the verse there in the Utah Jacob 2:30 that ostensibly could be read to allow it. You don't look very convinced, Paul.
I'm not at all convinced. I think I appreciate that is a repetition of what I've heard previously. I was in hopes that you would have a more detailed. I was in hopes you had some kind of an answer that would more satisfy me. Under the circumstances, I accept that probably there's no other such answer available. I cannot read it with the same emphasis that you do and have it make any sense, because the overall context is so absolutely contrary to the teachings and the experience of the church, I think, has also been contrary. It would appear that it has been a major stumbling block. Even in our church, the baptism of polygamists has been a significant issue, and yet in our church, I think we have a lot more of them, a lot more members that are polygamists than you do because of our outreach to India. And so it's interesting how our attitudes, the cultural attitudes change. But as Blair Bryant was suggesting, our needs to be able to culturally adjust remain significant as well.
You know, I'm presenting at FAIR in August, and the title of my presentation is Joseph Smith, a Reluctant Polygamist. And I portray him as, yeah, being involved, but not wanting to do it. And I've got a whole set of evidences, pieces of evidence put together that I think is pretty complete. He didn't want to do it, contrary to the way the critics portray him as an sexual opportunist, which I think is just really unfortunate and totally inaccurate.
Yeah, thank you. I like to think of him as a prophet of good character, and the attributions
He was.
the
Sorry.
attributions contrary are distressing for me.
Right.
All right. Well, and yeah, thank you. I appreciate your coming to us and sharing with us again. And what's the next research topic that we should call on you for?
Well, I was going to say polygamy, but who wants to talk about that? So when my book comes out, though, I'd love to come back on and maybe just talk about the whole big picture. You've kind of gotten two main uh, uh, parts of it in these two presentations, but the whole package is even more impressive. So how Joseph did it's a miracle. It's a miracle.
I'm intrigued as we prepare for the Book of Mormon bicentennial. Um, it'll be very interesting to see what our committees pull together for that celebration. I would invite you to elbow your way into it.
Oh, well, I hadn't thought that far, but it's coming up, isn't it? 4 years.
Yep.
Okay, Rick, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, Brian, if you stole that name from Meg Stout, the reluctant polygamist.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She did have her. Yeah, for those who don't know, Meg Stout is a member of the Utah Church, and she wrote a book a few years ago and was so excited when it came out. And then a few weeks later said, Brian, nobody's reading my book. And I'm going, well, that's kind of how it works if you self-publish, and the message wasn't exactly, yeah. So did I steal it from her? Actually, maybe I didn't even realize it till you now said that, but it's a good title. So, yeah.
Well, and then you asked a question, who wants to talk about polygamy? And of course, there's a big polygamy debate. I know Whitney Horning's been on here. In fact, she's coming up again. I don't know exactly. It says wisdom. I don't know what that means exactly. But and then Karen Hyatt have been on here, and I know you've tangled with them before. But yeah, there's a lot of people that like that topic. So, and by the way, I think I will just add. My paper, you remember at Whitmer, this is kind of a little semi-announcement, unofficial announcement. I think it's been they sent me back for revisions at the Journal of Mormon Social Science. So I'm hoping, I don't know exactly when that'll be published, but I was really excited
Good for
about
you.
that. That'll be my first paper. So
Yeah, good for you. You've just been interviewing all the people writing papers, but you've got the ability, so do it.
yeah, so I'm excited. Anyway,
It's
Congratulations.
great. Congrats. Yeah.
thanks. So I did present that here a couple of weeks ago, and I threw in the verse from Jacob so that I could fit it in the Book of Mormon forum, but it was all polygamy.
Well, and we learn more about sexuality from the Book of Mormon than any of us had ever looked for or anticipated.
Yeah, me too.
I have heard a few comments that maybe we didn't need to hear so much.
Yeah, I went in there a lot deeper than I've ever imagined. So
Well, Paul, if you wanted me to discuss Joseph as a reluctant polygamist, it's a presentation I'd be happy to share at some point after fair. I mean, you guys can talk about it, and I won't be offended if you don't want to go there. I don't blame you. It's not a fun topic.
I'm quite willing to have you on. We're booked up into October at this stage.
Hmm.
So yeah, in the fall, we'll be happy to invite you back.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, you guys are great. This is an intellectual crowd. I appreciate being here.
A little small on numbers tonight, but this is summertime with a lot of people on vacation, camps, and all kinds of conflicts. I'm here at Spectacular, and so not on my home computer, and so yeah, the arrangements we make in order to be able to persist can sometimes be a little bit overbending. But I do appreciate the fact that you're able to give us another. Well, the whole idea of editing our lives, editing. I mean, for trying to get a book published and recognizing how difficult and sometimes painful that is. Um, my son asked me to write my autobiography, and that's one of those things that you can do without a whole lot of editing. And yet, I'm discovering it needs a bunch of editing as well. And I find myself duplicating myself here and there, and it's all kinds of things that make it so the first time through, now the third time through, here I am adding more stories every week. it's but to look back, and here I want to come toward the conclusion, to look back and try to figure out what is the central message. And for us to be able to appreciate the central messages of the Book of Mormon, I already presented it as I saw it, but let's give you the chance to reiterate that, if you would, please. What do you perceive as the central message of the Book of Mormon?
Well, the Utah Church has subtitled it a another testimony of Jesus Christ, and in some of my presentations, I talk about the Book of Mormon as being a miracle in three different ways. One of those ways is that it promises people who read it a spiritual experience from God that affirms that it is a divinely inspired book. The second miracle is that its description of the atonement and of Christ's role is something that I believe an uninspired person could not create. That it's really a wonderful testament of Scripture way to grow closer to Christ. It's a miracle in the third way because Joseph simply didn't have the skills to do it. He had to have had some supernatural, and we call it spiritual, or the gift and power of God assistance to have done it. So I believe it's a miracle in several ways. I'm very grateful for it. Thank you, Paul.
Well, I'm intrigued as we listen to the presentations of such diverse views in this forum, and our diverse views have put the land of Nephi in Peru, in Guatemala, in the Malay Peninsula, in Georgia, in Chesapeake Bay, and Joseph Smith's Head. I mean, and then there's more. We haven't got to some others yet, and all of these presentations have come from people who were sincere and had doing good research and have something worthwhile to say. And yet, it makes it rather difficult to make the case for all of them being correct. At the same time, it may very well be that there is enough allegory there to make it all correct. And so the fact of how people disagree about historicity, geography, all the elements of it, there's generally an agreement that there is some value in it that for many people makes it worth considering as scripture. And so I've been very much pleased to have, even though the people that present and give us diverse viewpoints will come around to recognizing something of value in the book that makes it so it has survived now almost 200 years and deserves to be celebrated. It's almost 9:30, and if we don't have other questions or comments, and I certainly don't want to shut things off prematurely, then I will sing and we'll terminate the recording. We limit not the truth of God to our poor reach of mind, in notions of our day and sect, crude, partial, and confined. and let a new and better hope within our hearts be stirred. The Lord hath yet more light and truth to break forth from his word. For us to be edited by the editor, the writer, the author of the universe, means, I believe, that we are called to become people of peace, to be participants in that remarkable arc of history which is headed toward the projections of Isaiah saying, a child shall lead the lion and the lamb. There are some significant transformations needed. But if we can become the kind of people who can breathe the breath of love with every breath we take, we can become people of peace. If we become people of peace, I believe we fulfill the requirement to become agents of, not just agency, but to become agents of the Prince of Peace. I believe that is our call. So thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining in the sharing of this forum. And thank you, Brother Hales, for bringing the message this evening and sharing with us a great deal of detail. And while Brother Bryant suggests that maybe we ought to be taking other approaches, I like the fact that here we can affably agree and disagree, and continue to treat each other as other people who are other people upon whom we can see the handprints of the divine. If we can see a little bit of God in each of the other person around us, then I believe that really helps to move us toward becoming people of peace. Good night. May God bless you.